The Heart of the Storm. A Viking love story. The cold wind howled through the fjords of Vestland, carrying with it the scent of salt and snow. In the village of Ravensfjord, warriors were sharpening their blades, preparing their ships, and stoking the fires of conquest. Among them was Leif Stormrson, a Viking renowned for his ferocity in battle and his unyielding heart. But within the storm of his soul, there was a space of quiet longing he could not name, until he met her. Astrid Eirikdottir was unlike anyone Leif had ever encountered. She was no shield maiden, yet her presence was as commanding as a warrior's. Astrid was the village healer, her hands skilled in the art of mending wounds and soothing pain. She lived on the outskirts of Ravensfjord, near the cliffs where the ocean roared. Many in the village whispered about her strange connection to the old gods. They said her blue eyes held the secrets of the Norns who wove the threads of fate. Leif first saw her during the winter feast, her golden hair catching the firelight like a sunbeam in the darkest season. She sat quietly, her gaze distant, as if she could see things others could not. It was her silence that intrigued him most. While others clamored for attention, Astrid seemed content to observe. When Leif approached her, the hall grew quiet, for the warrior rarely spoke to anyone outside his warband. "Astrid Eirikdottir," he said, his voice a rumble that seemed to echo the mountains. "Do you fear the storm?" She looked up at him, her eyes steady. "I am the storm," she replied with a small smile. From that moment, Leif was captivated. The weeks that followed were a dance of quiet moments and stolen glances. Leif found himself visiting Astrid's cottage under the guise of seeking treatment for minor wounds. She would scold him for his recklessness, but her touch was always gentle. They talked of the sea, the gods, and the stars, and Leif discovered a depth in Astrid that both challenged and soothed him. For Astrid, Leif was a force of nature, wild and untamed, yet surprisingly tender in ways he tried to hide. She saw in him a man who carried the weight of his people's expectations, a warrior who longed for something beyond blood and glory. Their love grew in secret, for a healer and a warrior made an unlikely pair in the eyes of their village. But the gods, it seemed, had other plans. One fateful spring, the chieftain of Ravensfjord declared war on a rival clan. Leif, as one of the most skilled warriors, was tasked with leading the raid. The night before his departure, he found himself at Astrid's door. "You'll be careful," she said, her voice trembling as she tied a small charm to his wrist. It was made of leather and bone, carved with runes for protection. "I'll return to you," he promised, his rough hand brushing against her cheek. Astrid pulled him close, her heart aching. "You'd better. If you don't, I'll come to Helheim and drag you back myself." Leif laughed, but there was a shadow in his eyes. "I believe you would." They spent that night together, their love sealed by whispered words and shared breaths. As dawn broke, Leif left with the fleet, his heart heavier than his shield. The raid was brutal, the rival clan was fierce, and the battle stretched over days. Leif fought with the fury of Thor himself, but even the mightiest warriors could not escape unscathed. On the final day, as the enemy chieftain fell beneath his blade, Leif took a spear to the side. He collapsed on the battlefield, the world fading into darkness. When he awoke, he was aboard the longship, his comrades rowing hard to return to Ravensfjord. The village healer was the only thought in his mind. Astrid was waiting at the docks when the ships returned. When she saw Leif carried off the ship, pale and barely conscious, she ran to him, her heart pounding. For days, she fought to keep him alive, using every herb and rune in her arsenal. Leif drifted between life and death, his body burning with fever. Astrid stayed by his side, whispering prayers to the gods and promises to him. "You are not allowed to leave me," she said one night, her voice breaking. "You promised to return." As if hearing her, Leif's hand twitched, and he opened his eyes, his gaze locking onto hers. "I will always return to you," he rasped. Leif's recovery was slow, but Astrid never left his side. Their love, once a quiet flame, now burned brightly, defying the judgment of the village. Some frowned upon their union, but others marveled at how the fierce warrior softened in her presence. One day, as they sat on the cliffs overlooking the sea, Leif took Astrid's hand. "The gods brought us together," he said, his voice steady. "And I will honor them by making you my wife." Astrid smiled, her eyes glistening with tears. "You don't need the gods to tell you what your heart already knows." They married under the midsummer sun, with the village gathered to witness the union of the storm and the healer. Their love became the stuff of legend, a reminder that even in a world of blood and battle, the heart could find peace. Leif and Astrid spent their days together, raising children and protecting their people. And when they grew old, they would sit by the fire, telling their grandchildren the story of how love could calm even the fiercest storm. And when they passed, it was said their spirits roamed the cliffs together, watching over Ravensfjord, their love eternal as the sea.